Sir. You're welcome to the Technology Times Policy Exchange in Nigeria and the geopolitics of local technology content. Sir, please can you introduce yourself for our viewers?
I am Engineer Bayo Banjo. In the early days of Telecoms, I took advantage of the new licensing structure that was effected by the IBB and engaged in various aspects of telecom that were hitherto only under the preview of NITEL at that time.
As the founder of these communications, you played an important role in introducing paging and PTV services in Nigeria. So what led you to that role?
Well, when you see a vacuum, in my day, you could count the number of landlines. I think in those days there were like 200,000 landlines, I think, in the whole of Nigeria. So you can imagine how restricted telecoms was. In fact, when they started the mobile phone, again, NITEL was the only one there. They achieved things like 22,000 subscribers in the whole of Nigeria. So you can imagine that there was a great demand for communication. So naturally, when IBB at the time opened up that aspect of government, aspect of business, naturally I saw the demand and the need, and I jumped into it as quickly as possible. I would say my contribution was mainly, I showed people that it could be done locally. You can actually do these things locally, assemble equipment from abroad, and like with most things, they first start off very small. If you look at something like vehicles, they started off from bicycle makers in the UK and France. They now put 4 wheels on a bicycle, added an engine, and you had a car. So in those early days, I was able to start and show people that it's not a business that you require some huge foreign investment to do. That you can actually start small and then grow.
So in the first part, you mentioned that it was restrictive. So how did you handle the regulatory and operating environments at that time, and what lessons can today's entrepreneurs learn from it?
Generally, whenever you're in an environment, you have to look at the character of the regulators. Sometimes you are lucky, you have a regulator that follows the policy, doesn't put any restrictions. Or sometimes you have some regulators that bypass even the regulations and enhance the industries. And then you also have some that are a bit negative. We were lucky in Nigeria to have we had an EVC that, despite regulation and rules, he allowed the VSAT to be operated. NITEL constantly protested about the VSAT, but the VSAT allowed communication abroad and within Nigeria independent of the main carrier at the time, which was NITEL. And then it allowed, as such, other carriers, because to me, telecoms is usually just a carrier. You're a carrier. What goes on telecoms or communication network is another subject, which is now included under communications. So how you manage it according to how you see the environment. We were a bit lucky. Roman 2 broke the NITEL monopoly of what they call international traffic, and whatever, despite in fact, the laws had to be altered later on to approve those things. Then we had another gentleman who made obtaining licenses very easy. As you can imagine, in most things in Nigeria, there's usually a, should we say, finder's fee or some form of encouragement before you can get permissions to do certain things. So if you are lucky to meet a regulator, a policy guardian that allows the policy to be followed strictly and doesn't put a premium or obstacles in your way. But when you meet those obstacles, you adjust accordingly, as all businessmen do.
So how competitive do you think the Nigerian local telecoms market is? And how do you think local businesses can enter? And what do you think can be done to create a level playing field?
Well, right now, the main communications networks, which is what they call the channels, the tubes, has now reached a level where it requires a huge infrastructure. So to enter at that level requires huge investments. To make it easy, well, banks should be forced or encouraged to allow those things to occur. Because even when a foreigner comes in here, maybe to set up, let's say, mobile network, he's backed up by banks abroad or investors abroad. Here, it's a bit sad that a person wanting to set up something big usually has a problem of how to obtain funds. And so I suppose that's about the other aspect of what rides on the network. For instance, now communications is moving towards what rides on it, whether it's the social media, whether it's even the voice communications is now moving solely onto the main carrier, which is the internet, so to speak. Now, those kind of things don't require that much investment. But as usual, we have a strange philosophy in our country where when you are small, you are ignored. When you become big, the extortion starts. And in many cases, the extortion drives you out of business. But again, another problem is, like I said earlier, is the access to funds. The unfortunate part of the communication business is that it changes so fast that sometimes you have to make a complete new investment in infrastructure, which requires funds. So for instance, if I was a small operator in those days and I managed to have a mobile network covering Lagos, how do I expand? Where do I get the money from as a local person? Investors are hard to come by, and banks they don't have a proper policy or an encouragement to banks to loan money like they do, for instance, with agriculture. In agriculture, you may have a policy where the loans will be at 2.5% or 5%. You don't really have that for the telecom industry. So if we don't have those supports that you see normally abroad, things here become very difficult when you want to actually play the game. Because now the primary, what they call primary ducts require huge investment.
And what do you think can be done to mitigate this?
Good policies and people who are going to implement those policies. Like I said, what is the main problem is finance. If a person has proven his managerial abilities, his entrepreneurial abilities, etc., The next problem is finance. And technically, we don't really have the infrastructure to provide that for finance. Sadly, it seems that most of the free finance are in the hands of people that are probably not interested, that like to remain in conservative, safe businesses. So again, you need to have a policy where somebody can borrow money, where banks are ready to take a risk in investing in communication infrastructure.
Speaking about policies, we have several policies aimed at promoting local technology content. So, from your perspective, what has been the biggest challenge or obstacle, especially in the public institutions procurement process?
Generally, the biggest problem are those who implement the policy. That has always been. We take um, we take policy for granted. It's more like a showpiece, advertising that you're doing well. But remember, when you put in a policy, someone has to encourage and manage those policies. If you can put in a policy that is self-correcting, then all the better. The example I can give of a policy that was self-correcting is there was a time I was also into the entertainment, my cable, whatever. And I remember what I insisted with the NBC at that time was that we increase the local content. And I sort of told them that once you do that, you will find that talent will remain, will gyrate. So, for instance, I managed to get radio to I think the level of 70% to 80% local content, to the horror of my fellow operators. When it comes to television, I mean, my main opposition was they wanted to be lazy and bring in Mexican films and other material. And I told them that once you put in a policy and follow it, it will explode. And it happened. Because at that time, people with talent, they'll be frustrated in music, frustrated in this, they'll end up getting a job in a bank. So talent will automatically. But now, look what has happened. I mean, just because of the policy, video, Nollywood, music industry has exploded beyond leaps and bounds. Now they don't even need those policy restrictions anymore. And we at that time, we witnessed when we went to a nightclub, it was always Michael Jackson and whatever. Now, go to a nightclub, you can hardly even hear foreign. That's all because of policy, which was a self-correcting policy. Just make sure you force people to broadcast this percentage, the rest will take care of itself. So the main problem is those that enforce the policy and turn a blind eye when it suits them. So policy really is the main foundation of any development.
Based on your experience as a tech industry pioneer, what policies do you think can encourage local content that can compete globally, and what incentives do you think we can use to do that?
The first you have to define what you mean by content. Like I said, people are, when you say digital, people have now moved the whole communication of digital environment to what rides on the ducks. One thing that is holding us back is that the government has failed to realize that this game is a young person's game. For the first time, we have an industry that, which has never occurred before, where every 5 years, things change completely. And what was before that 5 years is completely obsolete. So, for instance, in engineering, as years go by, you build on the engineering. Medicine, you build on the medicine. In, let's say, the digital environment, what is 5 years ago is irrelevant, has no relevance to what is here now, which means that your educational system must keep in line with it. So, unlike before, where someone is teaching medicine, you know, you will add the new developments to what is existing. But in a digital environment, what existed before is completely obsolete. So you can imagine an education. That means our universities should be changing their curriculum, let's say every 4 years. Complete change. I mean, I hear rumors, for instance, that there's some universities still teaching Fortran 4. I don't know if you've heard of Fortran 4, but you see, we've gone. Those things are completely now obsolete. I mean, even operating systems gone. When I was, we had things like CPM, NPM, the multi-user. Now you have Windows, you have, and so on. But the consequence of this is that in Nigeria, we find that older people try to hold on to something that can only be operated by younger people. So I do not expect to see a professor in university in programming that is older than 30. Because he can't. By the time you get to those ages, your brain can't really function at that level. It's a bit like football. A player has to realize that when you reach a certain age, it's only young people. You can go into coaching, but to play football, there's an age barrier. So, but in Nigeria, we have people who are sticking to policies or creating policies, and they're not equipped. They're not equipped due to age to even do it. And the government has to realize that. If you look at countries that are advancing, you find that they come here and they poach our brilliant minds. And we don't realize here that that is the bedrock of their development. Then occasionally you hear a story of a Nigerian, now an American, developed this, developed that, and it's helping America. But here it was ignored because we put in policies that would not recognize him, not promote him. And I think that is one of the biggest problems. The older generation should realize that this is not a playing field for them. Programming, the innovations. In fact, I got my first shock when a good friend of mine, one of my children was 3 years old, and a good friend of mine said, give him an iPad to play with. Within a few months or so, of course, the child was downloading these small little games and whatever. Then, whenever he got stuck, he would come to me and say, "This one it doesn't download." He would ask for $1 or something like that. But as I watched him play on the computer, it suddenly dawned on me: he's an illiterate. He can't read or write. He's operating a computer, he's downloading programs. That is to show you how this concept is so different. I mean, you think about it, he's an illiterate, he doesn't know ABC at that age, he doesn't know this, but he's operating a computer, downloading programs, playing all the little games. And the government has to realize this. So if you go to the US, China, and all those countries, their digital environment is run by young people. Look at the incident of hacking, where people break into programs or whatever. Old people can't do it. Hackers, I think they start from like 30, they get to their prime at around 18. Now, so what does the foreign government do? When they have a problem with cybersecurity, when they see a brilliant fellow who they've arrested for committing a crime, they now give him a choice. Go to jail, come to work for us. Because it's an art form. So a lot of our policies, we have to realize that we have to have a policy to encourage the capture of these people. Look at, for instance, in revenue from games. You have 9-year-olds that earn hundreds of thousands of dollars testing games for the big companies. So a 9-year-old is earning, let's say, $500,000 to test a game. Do we have laws to protect or encourage that person? Will the parents just take the child's money? Can the child open a bank account? What do we have that can accommodate these new, what policies that can accommodate these new tendencies in this industry? And that is something we're not looking at. We have old people like myself who are creating our castles and guarding our control. One of the examples was, I remember some decades ago, there was a gentleman in, I think, Bayo University. At that time, Apple was buying small programs of $500 when you write a program to Apple, they pay you money. And he was noticed and was advised that why doesn't he go and help the Kano government computerize their systems. So he was introduced, and the first question they asked him, are you registered by the Computer Software Society, or whatever they called? And so he went to try and register. They said, but you're studying political science. On what basis do we register you? So again, what I'm trying to get across to you is that this discipline is so different that the old policies, the old ideas need to be overhauled. And it's easy, they're doing it abroad, we can see what they're doing. So, as in football, when you get too old, give it up for younger people to play. You tend to lose the ability as you grow older. So that's what I'd say is the main policy move we need to do to get our digital environment developed.
The telecom tariffs increase has been on the public agenda for the past couple of months. What's your take on the 50% tariff approved by the NCC?
Well, the way I look at it is that to increase tariffs, you must first do an in-depth study of how that business functions. You must remember in telecoms, most of what they are doing is moving information from here to here. This is not like a factory where you have to buy a raw material that has gone up twice in cost. So in the telecom industry, what are their costs? Supplying power to the equipment, maintaining the equipment. You'll have an average of what will go faulty, damage, all those other costs, their salaries. It is from there that you would calculate, and of course, obviously, when you do this kind of regulation, you are prescribing a certain profit margin that you expect them to make. Those things have not really been revealed to us. But if you were to look at it in terms of the FX rise, I mean, FX, I would estimate it as gone times 5, times 10 of what it was when telecom started. And as such, other costs like their salaries and whatever would have gone up. 50%, I think, is, considering my ignorance of the other costs, would be, I adequate, if not low. That's the way I look at it. But always remember, this is a business where its primary revenue is not on processing and imported something. It's just sending information over a period. So that is its revenue is mainly from that. So you look at the cost of running that. You understand that? But until a proper analysis is done, people like me, if you go on the effect of foreign exchange, 50% is to me a bit small. That's the way I would look at it. The way things have gone up, because I'm sure even the other costs have also gone up. I mean, telecoms, they have been double taxation, they have been bullied, they have been extorted. Everybody from local government to all tiers of government have sort of gone after them. We had those costs as well in their costs. But the only thing that anyone can argue that is below that is that the majority of their business is not they need to buy raw material like in a factory. You need to buy your raw material, and that has gone up in price. The raw material is no raw material. You're just talking on the networks.
The digital divide is still a major issue in Nigeria. So how can we promote local technology content that can help bridge this divide and ensure that those in the rural or underserved areas are still catered?
Again, it has to be government policy and incentives. You have to put strong policy, penalties, and incentives for people to go to those areas. There are some benefits. For instance, if you could get proper communication coverage in rural areas, it means you can stem the tide of the population migration into the cities because people can work remotely. So it's mainly policy enforcement and enforcement. Enforcement has always been a problem. I mean, to me, that is in fact, the main problem, I think, in Nigeria on a whole. You make the adequate laws, but then you don't enforce them. Or you enforce them selectively, which makes it even worse. But I think that's it. Where we are failing as a nation, as communications, or any endeavor, is the enforcement of rules. People are allowed to do things based on their profile, or their wealth, or certain other biases, whether it's political or what have you. And unfortunately, I always say that there are limits to how you can develop if this thing is not, if people are not allowed, are not forced to account for their wealth. Once people don't account for their wealth, so they can apply sanctions where you see they're erring, they're not going anywhere. So the same thing applies to telecoms. You have your policies, who's going to enforce them, etc. So the digital divide with rural and whatever will always be there. Why would I go to the rural area when I can make the equipment I put in the rural area? I can make 100 times that in the urban area. Yeah.
Speaking on enforcement, what do you think can be done in that area? What steps would you recommend?
You get people. That is very complex because the point is, when you want to enforce anything, you have to live by example. It is difficult for you to enforce anything, either if you are not living by those laws, or there's a perception you're not living by those laws, which is normal. I mean, the way I look at it, I've always said that if if a judge was prosecuting me and he happens to be Lawrence Anini, I won't agree with him. But I say it. But if, let's say, someone like Wale Soyinka, who you respect, is giving judgment, you would follow it. This is a natural human nature. So until we get people to be sanctioned for when they break the laws, and it's seen to be the same for everybody under our supposed democratic legal framework, then we will remain at this level. And if you know how backward we really are, Nigeria is extremely backward. If you go to an advanced country, you know, you see magnetic trains, all these kind of funny stuff. And this is made by them. I'm still waiting for Nigeria to succeed in manufacturing a pencil without having a foreign input. That's how bad it is. So, like the one we have in Akwa Ibom State, they even import their graphite for the pencil. That's the problem. We confuse assembling with creating, manufacturing. So until we get charge of enforcing policies, laws, etc., equally, we remain like at our level, let's put it that way.
President Bola Tinubu has made the digital economy a key focus for his administration. How do you assess his performance so far?
Well, again, let us be honest. Most of the performances in the telco section has been done by the telco companies themselves. In fact, in most cases, government has always been a hindrance. I'm so surprised when government tries to take credit. The way I look at the telco industry, we were all held in a cage, right? And we couldn't do anything. The only thing government did was open the door and allowed us to come out. And then the telco industry itself did all these advancements. Okay, some regulation, but what really has been the input of government? It's opening that door. The rest has actually been done by telco operators. So when you say governments doing this or doing that, no, it's being done by itself. It's following the normal economic trend. There's no credit for the government except opening that cage door and allowing us to come out.
If you had one key message for policymakers and industry leaders, including the president, what would that be?
Everything is a system, interconnected. 3 branches of government, laws, enforcement, etc. Anything you want to do, whether it's telecom or anything, you must remember nothing works in isolation. You cannot copy a model from abroad and forgetting that the reason why this model survives is because of another aspect of government. I don't know if that answers the question. In short, enforce the laws, live by example, enforce the laws, etc. That I would say the advice. I've given the advice on age. Realize it's a different concept. And realize something now that education has to be overhauled. People have to be educated on what this is. I mean, when you even say to people like blockchain, or I don't even know what that means. Even some of the terms in the digital environment, how many people really know what those things mean? we're not educated in it. You know, when we talk about educating, like you journalists, you hold your seminars and you all get there. But you're not really teaching people what exactly it is. You're not seeing what is going on. Like I saw what was going on with the 3-year-old, an illiterate is operating a machine. He's downloading programs. He can't read or write. He's downloading programs. That shows you it's a complete different environment. So my advice is all our universities, all our schools, we must try and teach people the basics of programming, telecoms, and whatever. It's not just passing a course. It is seeing the impact or realizing the impact. For instance, I find Nigeria has really advanced in the. I mean, we are almost cashless in the rural, in the urban areas. We're almost, which is fantastic. But is it government that did that? No, it's the private institutions themselves, the banks, took advantage of that. I mean, now we move on to other technologies where they threaten the banks. Something like OPay, for instance. You see? So government has to realize, sit down. There's an example of where policy needs to be looked in carefully. Certain developments come that will wipe out old institutions. In Kenya now, the telco companies are the banks. Their monies are held on their mobile phone. So we need to realize, we need to have a policy where we probably have a think tank of young people that would sit down. Maybe they'll be supervised by some old cronies because of maturity. Sometimes you need maturity, which the young can't supply. But figuring out the trends, it's a young person's game. That's the way I look at it.
Looking back at these communications, what would you see as your biggest legacy, and what advice would you give to young tech entrepreneurs?
I think the only legacy I'd probably say is that I taught people that things that they otherwise thought could only be done by some big foreign company can actually be done locally. There's really no difference between here and there except education, your culture, how you think. That's the only real difference. You know? And I think that probably is a legacy. A lot of things that I thought would be a legacy, people have forgotten because they don't even notice it. So, for instance, my move to encourage local content in music and TV. And I told them that it will explode, and boy, did it explode. You, as an interviewer, you're probably too young. But if you ask people of my age, like I said, you go to all these nightclubs, and there's always Michael Jackson, Kool and the Gang, Shalamar, and music from America. Now what do Nigerians want to watch? Right? They want to watch local films that are relevant to us, that are in tune with our culture. Other people who show films closer to our culture, they're very popular. Like Indian films are very popular because they don't show. They show things that I don't know appeal more to our sense of romance or whatever. But the government must realize that, unlike all those others, this particular business, it's young people, particularly programming. And our educational system doesn't really support that. You go in there and they just teach you, this is how they don't teach you how it fits in. I suppose that's on that.
Finally, is there anything we might have left out during the course of this interview that you'd like to talk about?
To me, the only thing I'm really concerned about is it's an overriding theme I've been talking about there is simple. We will remain in our present existence, which is we live off our minerals. We're adding no value to the planet other than we sit on valuable minerals. And if we want that to change, we have to accept different models. We have to accept that different models of existence require order, require rules, policies, and enforcement. None of those things can survive without enforcement. So, in layman's term, Nigeria wants to progress. The first thing, which I think is not very difficult to do, is everybody should account for their wealth. Once that is done, I'm surprised nobody has adopted that, because the taxman will be extremely happy. But you see, when you don't account for wealth, then you have characters like, what's that chap in Festac, that kidnapper, Evans, who is living off kidnapping, who's living off crime, was obtaining chieftaincy titles, getting prominence, and would have soon gone for governorship. Now, you cannot have, when you have a system that allows such people to reach certain, then you have a problem. And right now, what is the impression of a politician right now? Or what is the impression of why you go into politics? I mean, people go into politics to share their part, to share from the national gate. And someone has to say that that is the truth. The rare few people that go there to do good are pushed out. I say things like, no good deed goes unpunished. So we have to get our priorities, our policies, and our culture intact or adjusted. A lot of what are coming from the West is wrong. Look at the LGBTQ nonsense, you know. But in general, our main problem has been enforcing the laws, policies we are putting on ground. That it boils down to that. And without that, we cannot function. And I would advise those in power, go and visit China, US, and look at their infrastructure, look at what they've achieved. They are human beings just like you. The only difference is what is in their brain, whether it be education, whether it be culture, ability to work together. Nigeria as a country, we need to get rid of our selfish. We are very selfish individuals. All of us think me, myself, and I. So let me give an example of how it manifests itself. I think Lekki is the only place in the world where rich people do not have pipe-borne water, good security, and all the things that normally in a democracy, the people in an area would vote to put representation there that would increase their standard of living. Everyone is happy to be, I have my borehole, I have my generator, in short, the country, I have my security, country. So to me, that foundation would seep, that issues would seep up into any other thing. So it's difficult to talk about the progression of telecoms if you don't talk about proper regulation, people to follow the policies, people to implement this. And again, don't blame the president. What is the Minister for Communications for, Information for, whatever? Those relevant ministers, that is their charge. We should also stop always blaming the top. For instance, in police activities, Commissioner of Police should be the top person. If he wants to stop Boko Haram, he should make a request for the equipment, whatever. The others are called inspectors. They inspect. They really have no business with the down to earth, whatever. So generally, that's my own advice. We can talk all these things in the air. The reason why telecoms has survived, it's mainly run by the industry itself. That's the main issue. And regulators should remain regulators. Don't get, for instance, NCC has no business in supplying rural telecommunication, which they have tried at least 5, 6, 7 times and failed. In our setup, get a private company, give them the incentive to move there. So that's where I've summarized it.
Thank you very much, sir, for joining us at the Technology Times Policy Exchange. What words do you have for Technology Times?
Well, technology is the future. It's dynamic. So you have a lot of work to do, a lot to cover, a lot to encourage, a lot to take the nasty job of being a watchdog, which is something any form of democratic setup needs. You need a watchdog to keep, to expose things when they're not going correct. And that, to me, also is why democracy is failing here. The press don't realize their responsibility.
All right. Thank you very much, sir.
You're welcome.